Macron's never-ending dance with despots needs to stop. President Emmanuel Macron stands accused of tyranny by much of the French public, furious that he raised France's retirement age to 64. It's a bizarre claim. In fact, Macron did what he promised to do in his re-election campaign last year. He did it by constitutional means, and even under his reform, most French workers remain younger when they qualify for retirement, at full pension, than in other advanced Western countries. The real problem with Macron's record, and the main danger for his legacy, is not that he is a closet dictator. It is that he has courted, coddled and kowtowed to actual dictators. Worse, he does not seem to learn from those errors, which have provided cover for some of the world's most pitiless autocracies. The short list of tyrants for whom Macron has served as sympathizer or apologist includes Russia's Vladimir Putin, China's Xi Jinping and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS. His motivations appear varied. In Putin's case, the French leader eventually reckoned with the Kremlin despot's neo-imperialist delusions, which should have been apparent much earlier. In each instance, however, Macron's words have been a tonic for bullies and a wedge dividing Western allies at exactly the moment they could least afford disunity. It was telling that NATO's Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, when I interviewed him last month, had harsher words for Macron's pursuit of European strategic autonomy than he did for former President Donald Trump, who repeatedly threatened to destroy the transatlantic alliance by withdrawing the United States. "I believe in strategic solidarity," said the usually circumspect NATO chief. "Because if there's anything we have learned from the war in Ukraine, it's that North America and Europe have to stand together." Few blamed the French leader for his attempts to avert all-out war via personal diplomacy with Putin, with whom he spoke more than a dozen times as Russian troops massed on Ukraine's borders early last year, and even after they invaded. In doing so, he consulted closely with President Biden and other key NATO allies and embraced a realist view that negotiations will be necessary to stop the fighting at some point. But many in the alliance choked when Macron's insisted that the West must not humiliate Moscow but rather grant security guarantees to address its supposed fear that Ukraine presents some sort of threat. That mistook the aggressor for the victim, paid homage to Putin's propaganda, and was blind to the Russian dictator's predatory conduct in Chechnya, Syria, Georgia, Africa and elsewhere. He doubled down and further undercut Western solidarity in the face of Moscow's ruinous aggression on a trip to China in April. There, Macron provided succor to Xi, and, by inference, Putin, by suggesting that the fate of Taiwan, which faces the real and growing threat of invasion by China, is none of Europe's concern. "The continent's great risk," he said, "is getting caught up in crises that are not ours, which prevents it from building its strategic autonomy." That obsequious remark raised the obvious question of why the non-European world should therefore care about Ukraine's fate. Faced with fury in Washington and elsewhere, French diplomats were reduced to days of contrite backpedaling. These days, the French president is embroiled in another foreign policy furor of his own making, this time for lending a hand to MBS's campaign to whitewash his grisly human rights record through sporting events, spectacles and soft diplomacy. He did so by endorsing Saudi Arabia's bid to host World Expo 2030, a marquee international fair lasting up to 6 months, which would attract tens of millions of international visitors to the kingdom and billions of dollars in revenue. That would enhance the Saudi strongman's prestige and help sweep under the rug his past crimes, including ordering the murder of Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Incredibly, Macron's sop to the Saudis came at the expense of Italy, the other main candidate and France's neighbor. It's a curious move for a country that regards itself as among the world's leading human rights champions. The French president is hardly the only leader to embrace trade profits over principle. But to do so while slighting a major ally, at a moment of rising brutality among the world's dictators, is not just tone-deaf. It's values-blind. Macron is not wrong that Europe should build up its military might, independent of the United States, especially in the face of Moscow's aggression. He's put his money where his mouth is, seeking a jump in French defense spending of more than a third over the next 7 years. And he has come around to backing Kiev unequivocally, including with major arms shipments, while insisting that Russia be defeated, although, he says, not crushed. But foreign policy by damage control is a poor posture for one of the West's most prominent leaders as global tensions reach a boiling point. In currying favor with despots, Macron does not enhance French leadership or Europe's independent standing. He subverts them. Macron's never-ending dance with despots needs to stop. President Emmanuel Macron stands accused of tyranny by much of the French public, furious that he raised France's retirement age to 64. It's a bizarre claim. In fact, Macron did what he promised to do in his re-election campaign last year. He did it by constitutional means, and even under his reform, most French workers remain younger when they qualify for retirement. The U.S. House of Recriminations begins Biden's impeachment. A couple of weeks before the midterm elections, Kevin McCarthy assured voters that House Republicans, if given the majority, wouldn't be so rash as to go on an impeachment binge. "I think the country doesn't like impeachment used for political purposes at all," he told Punchbowl News at the time. "I think the country wants to heal," he added, and avowed that he didn't think anybody in the Biden administration merited impeachment proceedings. The voters gave Republicans a chance, awarding them narrow control of the House. And now Republicans are starting their impeachment binge. Representative Lauren Boebert, Republican Colorado, rose in the House Tuesday evening after the last vote. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Colorado seek recognition? Asked the presiding officer, Representative Russell Fry, Republican South Carolina. The gentlewoman sought recognition to unveil a parliamentary maneuver that would force a vote within 48 hours on H.Res. 503, impeaching Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States, for high crimes and misdemeanors. No impeachment proceedings. No investigation. No evidence. No crimes. Not so much as a parking ticket. Just a willy-nilly, snap vote to impeach the president, because Boebert dislikes Biden's immigration policies. In her mind, President Biden has intentionally facilitated a complete and total invasion at the southern border, she charged on the House floor. At this, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican Georgia, flew into a fit of jealousy because Boebert had thought to use the maneuver, called a privileged resolution, to force an impeachment vote before Greene got a vote on her articles of impeachment against Biden. Boebert stole her impeachment articles, Greene whined to reporters, calling Boebert that name that every kindergartner fears, copycat. Congresswoman Jewish Space Lasers then confronted Boebert on the House floor